Greetings and welcome to episode 41 of the Sustaining the Herd podcast, brought to you by Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm your host, Andrew Wadle, and joined in the studio with my co-host, Brock Vitek.
Hey there, Andrew.
Hi, Brock. And today we're also joined in the studio with our special guest, Dr. Amy Schmidt, Professor of Biological Systems Engineering at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, Brock. I'm glad to be here to talk with you guys.
Thanks for joining us today, Amy. And we really appreciate you joining us. And we want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about you.
All right. Well, I appreciate the chance to visit with you guys and with your listeners. I work in the area of livestock manure management and environmental systems. I usually describe it to people as kind of working at the nexus of livestock production, crop production, and communities, because really the integration of crop and livestock systems is one of those areas where sustainability, where we really see sustainability. But there also needs to be the understanding that these operations exist within communities that are not agricultural producers. And so we need to think about how agricultural practices impact those folks. So I work a lot with county regulators and communities who have questions about livestock production. I'm a faculty member at UNL, Biological Systems Engineering, and I also have an appointment in animal science. And then my role is 60% extension and 40% research. So really there's never a clear split between the two, but research that I do informs the programs that I put out for farmers and communities, and what I learn from those folks informs my research program. So that's kind of where my interests lie.
That's great. Thanks for that introduction, Amy.
Yeah, and my in terms of my pedigree, I come from a background of with a major professor of an extension and research background, and I can really appreciate for just how powerful it is and how beneficial it is to your producers in the state that you have someone who is then researching and then transferring the technology via extension to the people in the field, which I think is really what the land grant mission is about, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting. I think a lot of people don't really understand the tripartite mission of a land grant with research, teaching, and extension until you've worked in that area. And I will admit I was someone who really didn't know anything about extension until I met my master's degree advisor at Iowa State and did research and extension with him, and realized that I really enjoyed that aspect of being out there and on farms and talking to farmers and helping solve problems and do research that helped them be more sustainable and more profitable.
Amy, I'd like to come right out of the gate and ask you maybe a tough question here. I'll let you be the judge of how tough it is. We hear a lot about sustainability these days. And in fact, Andrew and I both have the word sustainability in our job titles. It's everywhere. Some people might call it a buzzword sometimes, but it really does matter in the livestock industry. And I know so many producers across Nebraska and across the country are working hard to be sustainable in their production. And here in Nebraska, we're known as the beef state. And a lot of the work we do here at Agri-Services and Engineering is working with the beef industry. So I'd like to ask, what does sustainable beef production mean to you?
So I think, obviously, I come at it from a nutrient management and manure management aspect and environmental aspect. So one of the most important things in my mind is that we have beef systems that are connected with cropping systems so that we're distributing those manure nutrients in a way that is meeting the agronomic needs of the crop and not over applying any nutrients. Water quality from both groundwater and surface water quality is a big part, I think, of sustainability. If we're not taking good care of the environment, we can't be sustainable. There will come a point where we are regulated into managing nitrogen better to protect groundwater. And so I look at like permitted animal feeding operations have very strict regulations as far as having a nutrient management plan, reporting on those inputs and outputs of the system, managing runoff from the fields by having setbacks from sensitive areas. And I think my program over the last probably decade has turned more towards the smaller livestock producers that are not permitted, and crop producers receiving manure from these folks, because I think it's really important that those folks who don't have all those reporting and planning requirements still are following what I call good manure manners. To me, being part of a community where people appreciate what you do and aren't worried about what impacts you might be having on their water and air quality, I think makes you sustainable. So, the term sustainable, I mean, over the years we've used sustainable and environmentally compatible and regenerative, and to me it comes down to doing the right things so that you're making a profit, you're protecting the environment, and you're being a good member of the community.
Absolutely. That all really does matter at the end of the day. And I love to hear that you're working with those smaller producers who are still a part of the industry, still producing cattle and beef, but they may not be regulated. And but just because there's not a regulation doesn't mean we shouldn't still try to do, quote unquote, the right thing. So absolutely love to hear that.
And so, Amy, as working with producers, whether they're small or whether they're large, where have you seen the greatest improvements made, throughout your career, when it comes to sustainability? In other words, how great? Tell us how great we are,
I think people don't realize how much more efficient agriculture has become in the last, 5 decades. I think about like my lifespan, but 3 decades of when I've been working in the industry. We've focused on better management of water, reduced inputs to the system, better feed efficiency, so that animals are growing more efficiently and takes less time for those animals to reach market weight. We've reduced the carbon footprint of systems by being more efficient. I think the quality of the products that are produced in agriculture in the U.S. are top notch. I don't worry about, I don't worry about foodborne illnesses and things like that the way people in other countries might. We have very inexpensive food, compared to other areas of the world, and it's plentiful here. Sure. And so I feel like industry-wide, whether it's cropping systems, livestock, beef, pork, chicken, dairy, we're doing more with less. And we never stop trying to figure out how to do even more with even less. And I think that gets lost as we look at industries grow. We think, well, that's just more water. They're using more feed. They're using more of everything. But I think we lose sight of the fact that we're not just feeding this country. We really are feeding the world, whether it's with our products going out or with grain going to other countries. And so I just think overall we've seen so many improvements in genetics, environmental management, feed efficiency, breeding of animals to produce the products that people want. And we try to talk about that as much as we can, but it doesn't necessarily resonate with everybody. So I would give a shout out to farmers for all the new things that they have tried and implemented because research said this will help you be more profitable and more productive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting and important that to note it. I'm really excited about that. Here, we're just toenail deep into this episode, and you have truly touched on the three things that we consider, the buckets of sustainability, and that is keeping the pollutants out of the air and the water. You just talked about efficiency, doing more with less, and then the other piece being, working with small business, keeping businesses, operating. And no, I think that's really awesome. And then, so, let's just look at the other side as well. So where do you think we still need to make some advances? Where do we need to what are the things we need to be getting after?
So I think one of our biggest issues is probably in distributing our nutrients in a way that is cost efficient, where we don't lose the value of the nitrogen and the phosphorus because it's costing so much to transport it to an area outside of that operation where the nutrients are needed. I do think that we particularly, and I would say not the permitted operations, because I think they're so heavily regulated through their permits. It's, they've got a nutrient management plan. They're reporting and recording everything. And I'm not sure that we've made that intricate level of management something that all farmers do because they should, not because they're regulated to do it. So I come back to the livestock farmers or smaller livestock farmers, and then our crop farmers who might get a load of beef cattle manure for their field, and they spread it on that field, get it out across there, but they don't really think about, did I put on more than I needed? Could I use that on more acres? So that's where I come back to kind of the minding your manure manners, test your soil, understand what's in that manure, apply it at a rate that is meeting the agronomic needs of your crop. And if you've got more than that field needs, then you've got value taking that to another field, following setbacks with manure application and with fertilizer. We usually think manure is bad, fertilizer is okay, but they both have contaminants in them that can move in the system. And so we're very careful about how and where we apply manure. And, so if we have a setback from a water body where we can't apply manure closer than 35 feet, we can still apply fertilizer up to the edge of there. So to me, that's one of those things that doesn't really make sense. And I really think we could do a better job of how we manage those nutrients. And, one of my big concerns is that citizens they don't understand the value of manure transfers and why that's so important to larger operations to be able to transfer manure to a crop farmer that's not part of their system. And I think to keep that ability, to keep that, as something that those farmers can do, we really need to focus on making sure that the people receiving that manure are handling it the way they should,
right?
And following the same regulations that our permitted animal feeding operations follow.
Sure.
So
and I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to say. I think from my narrow perspective in nutrient management, it's just doing a better job of demonstrating to the public that we are all doing the right thing, not because someone tells us to, but because we know it's the right thing to do.
Right. And I think it's perhaps all producers, a compelling case can be made when it comes to this dispersal of nutrients, it being a business case, hopefully, where you say, well, you're going to you might take this manure farther, but now you're not going to buy commercial fertilizer for that farther field. And so, I think whether big or small, I think there's the dollar always can make a compelling case to do things, good or bad. But in this case, this is potentially favorable. I think it's a conversion from the disposal to the utilization mindset.
Yeah, I agree. It's seeing the value in it and making sure that that we are using it where we get the most value out of it. And I have kind of a funny story. I spoke at a transitioning to organic farming conference, and we usually think, organic farming, we'd all like to see systems be that, be that type of system where they're really taking care of the animals, they're really taking care of the land. And I had, there was a farmer on the panel that said he applied beef manure one year, and somebody asked him what rate he used, and he said, we put on 100 tons per acre. And the look on my face, he saw that and he was like, is that bad? And I was like, that's not good. No, yeah. I said, that's a lot. And so we talked afterwards, and I think from his perspective, it was, well, I need the carbon and the organic matter in my field. I'm not really as worried about the nutrients maybe. And so I talked to him about, if you're buying that, you ought to be getting value out of it. And you really lost a lot on that transaction if you didn't spread those nutrients out. And so that's where I get back to that, like, if you're not being regulated and told how to do it, we need to get that information to you. My goal is to save you money, and it's to make sure that you're using those nutrients responsibly. And it doesn't matter if you're conventional production system or organic or whatever. We all need to follow the same rules and the same best management practices on those systems. So I still see that guy at meetings, and he still laughs and says, "Don't lecture me," and I don't. But I think it was really good. It was a really good learning moment for him and the other people in the room at that meeting.
Hopefully he's not still applying 100 tons per acre.
He's not. He tells me, like, I haven't put any more on since then.
Oh, man, I need to get him using manure again. Maybe on a different field, though. That 100-ton field's probably good for a long time.
Yeah, that's what I told him. You'll never need manure there again.
Amy, I'd like to pivot a bit in the conversation and hone in on your research program. What current research projects do you have related to manure management that you could tell us about?
So I tend to, focus my primary research on looking at using manure sustainably in systems. So what are the application rates, the methods, how do we keep those nutrients from, leaching nitrogen and runoff? So it's best practices as far as controlling erosion and runoff, keeping things on the field. And I work with, nobody does research in a vacuum anymore. We work across disciplines. And so one of my close collaborators, Javed Iqbal over in agronomy, he and I will collaborate on projects where we're doing comparisons between inorganic fertilizer versus manure application, looking at nitrate movement in the soil, looking at efficiency of those systems, looking at nitrogen inhibitors with manure or inorganic to see what is the most economical way that we can manage nitrogen in those systems and also improve the soil quality and the productivity of that land. So we work in that kind of integrated area, but then I feel like in extension, or maybe it's in my area, there are always issues that come up that the industry wants help with that may not be it may not be what I've been doing work on, but I need to pivot and look at that because it's important to them. And one of those things is the role of manure in the transmission of the PRRS virus in swine. And so the PRRS virus is it's been a pain for the swine industry for several years. Doesn't seem to be going away. The virus tends to evolve. So we're seeing different strains that reinfect the same farm. And a few years back, there was an integrator in the state who said, when we we could have a building where the pigs had PRRS and we sell, those pigs to market. We clean the building, we disinfect, we bring in a new turn of pigs, and they're healthy and fine until we agitate the pit and pump manure, and then that building breaks with PRRS. And so we know that PRRS is a respiratory virus, so it's not spread by a fecal oral route like we think of some other viruses. And we cannot, I don't know of anybody yet who has been able to take a manure sample and find the virus in it. And I think it's because it's at such a low concentration in there, and it's such a virulent virus that it doesn't take much for that disease to be transmitted. So we've been looking at a couple of things. One is, can we find it in the exhaust air coming out of swine units that have PRRS positive pigs? And we have found it there. We built some air samplers, we put them in the building, we swabbed surfaces in the building, we set them outside, and we found the virus inside and then on our filters, 20 feet downwind of the fan. So we know it's coming out of the building, probably on dust particles. But we're also trying to figure out, can we find it? Can we detect it in manure so that we can start looking at what practices might mitigate the transmission risk when handling manure? And so I just got a grant funded recently with a collaborator at the Med Center in Omaha, and he did work on COVID, looking at community spread of COVID through wastewater systems. So he's going to apply some of those techniques that they use to isolate the virus out of wastewater samples and see if we can isolate the virus out of swine manure samples. If we can just find it, then we can start thinking about how we, is there a certain storage period before we can pump that? Is there a treatment method we can use so that when we do pump it, it's not aerosolizing viral particles? So that's one that's, it came up a few years ago and we've been working on it since then. It's, I think it's kind of a fun diversion from the normal like manure value and soil health work, but it all comes back to there's a valuable product in that pit, in the manure, and we need to find the best way to use it without harming other animals downwind of that facility or the environment, like we said. It's not an illness that is transmissible to people. Not worried about that, but it's devastating to the industry when you lose pigs to that disease. So yeah, that's an interesting diversion right now that I'm working with.
Well, I think it's awesome again because that speaks truly to the extension mission as far as doing research on matters that affect things at the producer level. I think of it as it's not so much test tube and petri dish and lab rat work. This is solving a real problem that has a real impact on the industry.
Yeah, I think that's just an outstanding example of living out the extension mission right there. Is serving the industry, they're informing the research you're doing. Your research is also helping them. And I really like the example of how you're collaborating with a researcher at the University Medical Center to apply some of their biomedical work with the COVID detection and maybe applying that to swine. I actually remember hearing about that back in 2020 or 2021 in the local news when the wastewater testing was being done here in Nebraska. So that rings a bell for me. Yeah, great work. Love to hear that type of work being done. Amy, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I always think it's exciting when you cross those boundaries where you never thought you'd work with that person before, and now you found this niche where agriculture and community health, are intersecting. So it's kind of a fun discovery.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. And so then, if you were to be the keeper of all research dollars, and granted, a lot of times you have to chase the research dollars that are available. Of course, you're also solving problems in the field, like you just noted. But then, if you were to be the keeper of all the research dollars, what's a burning interest of yours that you'd like to run down for the industry?
I think the biggest issue that agriculture is facing in Nebraska right now is managing nitrogen more efficiently. There's when I speak to a room full of farmers about nitrogen management, I often hear the crop folks say, well, it's the feedlots, they're the problem. And then I hear the livestock folks say, well, it's the crop systems that are using inorganic nitrogen. And not gonna lie, I've gone into my mom mode with them before. Like, I don't care what the other side is doing, and you shouldn't either. Yeah. Let's talk about what you can do. Even if you're a small part of the problem, you can still be a small part of the solution. And then let me go and talk to the other group about what they need to be doing differently. And so I think just the idea of, I think the most difficult part is changing the culture of, nobody likes to be told that they're not doing something the best way possible. And I understand that. So it's trying, I think there's a huge social science component to making these changes that will really positively impact communities and our groundwater in the state. And like it or not, we have high nitrate levels in several areas. It may not all be driven by agriculture, but I think a large portion of it is. And, we're looking at ways to more efficiently use nitrogen so that you put it where the plant needs it. You don't put on more than the plant needs, so it's not losing it. We manage it throughout the season instead of trying to put everything on before we plant and hope it lasts through the season. And so I think that is an area of research that will continue forever because, first of all, even if we come up with solutions, it takes a long time to see the long-term results that we want to see. So I think we'll build on that for years to come. But to me, that's I just think that nitrogen management is such a huge part of helping farmers be profitable and protecting communities. And I think that's probably where we need to be focusing the most of our attention as a group in our university system.
And then do you see that same discussion or the same concerns as it relates to phosphorus? Because we know if we're continuing to apply nitrogen at say corn silage rates again and again and again, we know what our phosphorus is doing.
Yeah, and phosphorus, of course, I think one thing that especially when I speak with community members, they don't necessarily understand that nitrogen can both run off and leach. Phosphorus is running off with erosion. So if we're controlling erosion, those edge of field practices, building our soil quality so that it's less prone to erosion, we're not only reducing our risk of losing phosphorus, but we're reducing the risk of losing topsoil, which is very valuable, and E. coli, which is everywhere in the environment. We do know it's in manure, so if we apply manure, we want to keep that any contaminants from leaving the field and making it to surface water. So when I talk best practices, I usually talk nitrogen best practices and then kind of everything else. And the everything else is keep the soil in place, keep the water on the field. And if we have runoff and erosion, we need to have some barrier between the field and water bodies so that we're keeping that out of the water. So yeah, phosphorus is, I don't think we ever really don't think about phosphorus. But I would say in Nebraska, where we have flatter ground, I've worked in Mississippi and Iowa and Missouri, phosphorus is a huge issue when you have steep slopes. Then your phosphorus index, it's not just how much is in the soil, but how far are you from a water body? How steep is that slope? What's the risk of phosphorus being carried off the field? And so I think it just differs based on the landscape and the geography that right now we focus a lot more on nitrogen, and I don't think we ignore phosphorus, but it's less of an urgent concern, I think, right now in the state.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's also a huge economic implication to be discussed, Amy, as it relates to nitrogen management, because nutrients cost money, whether it's commercial fertilizer or manure. A producer's probably paying for those nutrients. So I think the economics can't be overlooked either.
Yeah, they're definitely, no matter where they get it from, they're paying a high price for it. The message I usually try to share is use those locally available manure nutrients that are there, because not only do you get the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, zinc from that, but it's also helping improve the quality of your soil and the resilience of your cropland and the long-term fertility. And, I try to talk to farmers about, when you receive this land from your parents or grandparents, was it in perfect condition? Well, probably not. But your goal should be, before I hand this off to my kids or grandkids, have I improved it? Have I done something positive? Because you always want to think that the next generation, you're helping them start out better than you did. Most of us that have kids, that's our goal. And so we kind of look at it from that perspective of you can use inorganic fertilizer, and you can keep increasing your nitrogen inputs, and you can very incrementally get your yields up. But what are you really going to pass on better quality, more productive land to the next generation? Or are you passing on water quality issues because we're so focused on yield and not focused on return on investment? And that is a cultural issue that is very difficult. You don't talk about at the gas station when you run into people. You don't talk about your return on investment. You talk about your yield. What did you get for yield this year? And I think about it the same as like your own health. If you are in a group of people that are all trying to lose weight and become more healthy, you don't talk about how much better you feel. You talk about how many pounds you've lost. And really, the pounds are the part people see, but the behind the scenes of like, I feel better, I have lower blood pressure, my A1C is lower. Those are the things that are really important for your longevity. And I think that's what we need to think about with our cropping systems too, is the longevity, having it be the best system possible. And we may sacrifice a few bushels per acre on yield and actually make more per acre if we stop putting on so much nitrogen.
Right.
But we're putting on what those crops need, and we're getting the best return from what we're investing in that land. So that is, like I say, that is a cultural shift that it's really hard to change that perspective. But it's where we'll focus until we can see the needle moving to where people are kind of understanding that concept better.
Yes. And so, just switching gears a bit, we talked a lot about from the producer side and the research side, and again, coming back to your extension appointment and the land grant mission that goes along with all that, you certainly do come in contact with students, I'm sure, and just curious, coming back to our third bucket of sustainability, and that being successful businesses, and you need people, to run these successful businesses, to create these successful businesses. How are you guys doing at the university, to prepare your students to kind of come into this world of sustainability and manure management? And by the way, I just want to also add that we want to commend you, because a lot of times you come across university people and they're waste management specialists. You are a manure management specialist, and I think it's really cool that you make that distinction, because a lot of people don't. But anyway.
Yeah, I think that movement started probably early in my career when we
Yeah.
were trying to shift that thought from let's get rid of it so we don't have to deal with it too. Like there's a lot of value in this. And
Yeah. But I don't want to mention any four-letter named agencies, but they still are very deeply ensconced in the waste word. And so anyway, we're glad that you are a manure management specialist. But
Sure.
no, coming back to my question, what are you guys doing with your students as far as helping them to kind of get into this area because it's a big deal, the environmental aspect of animal agriculture.
Yeah, I think. So again, I come at it from the extension perspective. I don't teach in the classroom,
Right.
but I hire students to work in my lab group and in the field with me on my research. And I advise graduate students. So, another thing that I think folks may not realize, when you go out and you get research, when you get grant funds to do research, you can usually put in there that you're funding a graduate research assistant. So that's a graduate student. I'm going to pay your tuition. I'm going to pay you a stipend to work for me, and you're going to do this research, and you get a thesis or a dissertation out of it, and we get the data. And when I interview students who want to come work in my group as a graduate student, I tell them, you will do research because that's what a graduate program is about, but I do extension and you will do extension. And if you don't want to do that, I understand, that's okay, but this isn't the place for you. But you need to be able to answer the who cares question. You did all this work, who cares? What does it mean to farmers, to the public, to whatever? And so every student that I've had come through, I probably only had 2 or 3 that did not end up going into extension careers as extension educators if they just did a master's, or as faculty if they did a PhD. And so I have students at University of Puerto Rico, Colorado State, Cornell University, Guelph University in Canada, University of Idaho, that they've come here, they've learned what extension was, and now they love that aspect of combining research and helping people. And so they're out doing that extension work. And to me, that's a huge need to train that next generation of extension engineers, because we see extension. It's easy for someone to come out of an engineering program with a bachelor's degree and go make a lot of money. Why would you do a graduate degree unless you really want to teach, do research, do extension? And so we need to, I'm trying to push people towards, there's value in that extension research side and teaching as well. So that's one big part, is introducing those students to extension and what extension does. The other part is I do a lot of my outreach is in the form of videos and graphics and social media. And I don't like social media. I don't have time for social media, but I know that farmers get information that way. So I hire people who want to do that, and they learn the subject area, and then they are managing that social media. And it's been very successful. A lot of times the people I hire are journalism students, or maybe even an English major, people who are not in agriculture. And I tell them when they come in, we work with manure, the environment, livestock, and it's a totally new area to them. And then 6 months down the road, they're like, I love this. I love what you guys do. Like, I never thought manure would be fun to talk about, but there's so much more to agriculture than just raising animals and providing food. And so I've had some really good undergraduate students come through who really helped tell our story better. Like, I'll tell you, as an engineer, I'm not good at painting a picture of something. I want to give you data and be like, that's what you need. There's the data. You should do this. But there's more to it. The helping you visualize how this will improve your operation, or telling the story better. And those students have really helped us do that. And so, I'm not necessarily training entrepreneurs to go out and start businesses, or, we may not be directly funneling students into production systems. But I think in my lab group, we're putting students out there who understand agriculture and the connection that there needs to be between agriculture and the public, and they're capable of doing research that matters and asking themselves, so what? Why am I doing this? Who's it going to help? And if it's not helping anybody, why am I doing it? And so, the university itself has a lot of great entrepreneurial programs and ways that they help students with professional development. Our group, we're looking at training people to do extension and to be boots on the ground supporters of agriculture and their connection with communities and that sort of thing. So
that's awesome.
A little bit different than other programs, but I've got a lot of people out there in extension that have come through and are doing great work. So that makes me really happy.
Well, Amy, I think you summed it up really, really well there as we close out this episode. It's been a lot of fun having you on as our guest today, as we've talked about everything from your view, your take on sustainability in the livestock industry, to looking ahead at big challenges like nitrogen management, all the way to preparing the next generation of manure experts to serve the industry and telling us about extension. So thanks once again for being our guest today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was a joy talking to you guys.
And to all of our listeners, thank you, both new and returning listeners, for choosing to spend some time with Andrew and Amy and myself today. We've enjoyed having you with us, and we look forward to being back with you again in a couple of weeks with another fun episode. Until then, thanks for joining the herd today.